Oh, hi. Today I wanted to spend a little bit of time with you. This is my whiteboard session, and technically not a whiteboard, piece of paper. But wanted to talk a little bit about storytelling. It's been about a month since I launched 1980, and overwhelmingly I'm hearing more demand for marketing communications around storytelling, how I help my clients work on their stories. And so I'll spend a little bit of time today on the board, sharing a couple ideas and concepts. But before I get started, I want to do a couple shout outs on a kit and a few things that have been working well with me. I just got this via Kickstarter project from Mike Rohde. He's the Sketchnote Handbook guy and Airship Notebook. They created the Sketchnote Idea Book. So probably one of my favorite, if not all-time favorite notebooks so far. I'm a big notebook fan. It's got a really nice soft vegan leather cover. And I think what's really important for me are the pages. When you write on them with whatever pen you're using, it doesn't bleed. And so I use some pretty heavy inks, and any other notebook I've used before, it will definitely bleed, and so that's been a really cool thing. Of course, there's a couple guides here as well. I am not sure if they're going to be selling this in a marketplace outside of Kickstarter, but they just launched it, and so more information to come. I have not gone through all the details, but it looks like in the back pouch there's some really cool stuff here. A little thank you card, and ooh, got some stickers. So hey, leave a comment and maybe I will send one out to one of my viewers. And then secondly, I want to talk about a kit that I'm using for my graphic facilitation work. I'm using my camera bag, which is actually a pretty decent and perfect bag because it holds these pens from Neuland, and it is working pretty well. So in this kit I got my Neuland pens, so I'll use that for today's session, and just more pens after pens, tape, and looks like I got some of these Tombow pens, which are really awesome. So I'll put them to use so you can see how they work. So today we're talking about storytelling, and let's start with the basics and concepts of storytelling. And you notice I'll share some concepts and ideas along the way. As I'm writing, just take your time. I think one of the mistakes people make is when they're up there on the board, they feel compelled and rushed because everyone's watching them. I'm up there by myself, and I have an audience that's just staring at me. So just be confident and take your time. The slower you take, the higher quality the work. Now you notice I wrote storytelling, and I simply just put it in a little box, and I did it in various different components. I'll connect the dots here just to finish up that box. And then if you want to convert that box into a banner, let's add a couple tabs like this and an angle. Now it looks like it has a little ribbon. And darken this bottom part a little bit to create a little shading. And some depth. And there you go. So today we're talking about storytelling. So whenever I do a storytelling session, most people, when they're working with me, what happens is they'll come with me and I will lead them through a process, and I have not formalized that process, and I'm in the process of working that out. But for now, it's I call it the black box. Because people just rattle off things, and typically it comes in the form of just a list or a bunch of concepts. I call it a word vomit of just everything that they can think of. And in that black box in my head, then I take all the information that's shared with me, I convert it into a storyboard. Again, this is happening all in my head, and again, as alluded to, I'm working on a process of productizing that, creating it into a process and a method that can actually be used. But I'm creating a storyboard, and then in that storyboard, I'm thinking of the metaphor. So concepts, are we climbing up the mountain? Is there a sun over here? Create the vision. Crossing a bridge. Jumping out of the sky, going into space. Just different concepts that you can use along the way. And so you'll notice as I'm writing some of this, as I'm talking, whenever there's a free moment, what I'll then do is I take that moment to create some highlights, create some visual interest. And another thing I learned along the way is when you write something like this, it's actually floating. And so create some grounding. So now it's grounded to this spot in space right here. Love doing just some shading, create some interest. And as we're talking, what I'll do is I'll just keep doing this. Whenever there's a free moment, I'm shading, creating some interest to the illustration and graphic that we're drawing. And so in my head, I'm creating a storyboard and a metaphor of where we're going. And then what happens is I go back, I'll take all this, and then I'll put it together. Typically in the form of a PowerPoint, but it could be a video, an article, or whatnot. So all this is happening within my head. So let's take an attempt to extract some of that thought process and kind of start the process of creating this product of storytelling and how do you tell your story properly. So typically, let's go back to step one over here. And so if this is you and this is me and I'm working with you, typically what I see, especially with engineers or people with more project managers, people with more of a technical mindset, they'll just list off, I call them specs, right? So here's thought 1, thought 2, thought 3, thought 4, thought 5, thought 6. It can be linear. It could be all over the place. We could be juggling all around. It doesn't really matter, right? But general concept is you're rattling off ideas. And so my thought process is to always take a pause and step back and think of your audience here, right? Who are you communicating to? And then you can go through a whole convoluted process of segmenting your audience into different groups. But let's focus on who's your number one primary audience. Who's that person you want to reach, or that group of people you want to reach? Who do you want to market and communicate to? And so for a startup, you want to communicate to your customers, or if you're internal, you have a new project and you want to get your users to adopt this process. Let's call that your audience. And I'll do an empathy exercise for you to kind of start thinking about what do you want them to think, feel, and do. So let's break this into an empathy exercise. And so I'll use one metaphor. On my site, I used a different version of this, but let's use this version for now. So what do you want them to think? So this is the head going up to think. How do you want them to feel? And then sometimes I'll use this, not always, because it confuses people a little bit more, but when they hear things about you, so think of this as secondhand information. What do you want them to hear about you? And there's the ear. If you were to make this the person looking forward. And what do you want them to do? And sometimes we can change the feel to think and see. So like when they visually see you, what do you want them to see? And there's a lot of different metaphors out there. Let's see if I can grab a red pen for now. But this is just a method. General concept is make sure you are capturing what you want your audience to think, feel, and do. So think, most people I'm working with, here, this is all thinking stuff, right? Here's all the specs of my product that I'm really excited and I want you to know all these specs. And I might know a few things to do. So sometimes this part, the do part, is often the second weakest. So we talked about think. Do is the second weakest. And I think people typically then may, well, I want you to use my software. Well, let's be a little more specific. How do you want them to use your software? How does it make their world better? And I'm going to focus quite a bit of time on this whiteboard session because I think the biggest gap that most people have is focusing on the feel component here. If you're a marketing organization, if you're a more mission-driven organization, you might be better at this space. But most of the people I'm working with, most of my audience who are more project managers, engineers in nature, struggle the most on the feel component. Like, what is that feeling you want to evoke when they use your product, your system? Feel confidence, feel excited, feel hopeful, feel joy. These components here, this part of it, and along with the rest of this empathy map, helps create an audience profile. And so as you're creating your story, as you're taking this convoluted mess, and you're starting to organize it, how do you communicate in a way that hits on these points? And so let's think of this as a checkbox for now. And we'll go back to this checkbox after we create the story. And so now we have this convoluted mess. The next step I'll typically do is start thinking about who is the hero of the story, right? So the hero is not the product. It never should be the product. It never should be the system or tool or whatever you're creating. For you, I think for most people, that is their universe, and so they want to sell all the specs of the product. The hero is the user, the customer. So in this story, this hero here, we'll take the hero, we'll bring him through a journey. And again, another pitfall is people typically will start when we storyboard. I'll call it the beginning. But I'll also call it, most people call it background. If you've been in any corporate meeting, you'll likely know that we spend a ton amount of time on just setting the context, laying the groundwork, giving people the background, and then meetings running out, and oh my gosh, here we go, and we're out the door. So same concept in storytelling. A lot of people I work with typically will spend a bunch of time on the beginning and then never get to the punchline of the story. So spend just enough time to get a background. Think of it as the origin story of a superhero story, or it's just the beginning of that story. And then there's the middle. The middle is where the hero comes in conflict. And so this is the story. What's the pain point? Like, what challenges is the hero going through? What mountains are they trying to climb up? So we're going up this mountain, and what's causing them a lot of pain as they're going up this mountain? Whether the current system today is just really bad, manual process, things like that. Like, so these are the pain points. And then your product, all these components here, is coming in to solve that. So let's step back to the beginning again. In the beginning, we're not laying the groundwork for your product or the context of that. We're laying the groundwork for this hero. So you want the audience to relate to this person, right? So make it generic enough that this person is them. They can see themselves in that. Create that emotional feel. So think of a movie when you're watching movies that aren't well done, or movies where you can't relate to that hero. When something happens, you just don't feel anything because you have no emotional connection. So create that emotional connection here at the beginning. And then you've laid the context for the hero, you've created an emotional context in them. Now they can feel the pain go through it. Your product comes in, is saving the day, and that hero is now winning the story. In the end, they did it. A celebration. They cry out to the world saying, we've accomplished something. Things have gotten better because of this product, your service. And then in a business context, this doesn't happen in traditional storytelling, but in a business context, in a marketing context, you always end with a call to action. What do you want them to do? Visit your website, go do this, sign up for a free demo. You determine that. And so this is the structure of a story. And once you get advanced in this space, there's many other structures. I think Nancy Duarte did a great reference to Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, where he shows his dream and what is, and what his dream is, what is, and he goes back and forth. There's a lot of different structures. I think for the corporate audience that I'm working with, just simply adopting something as basic as beginning, middle, and end, making sure that your hero is not your product and it's the customer or the user, that will get you 90% there. And there's no need to focus and worry about any complex other components. Again, remember, if you're working with me, if you're in this space, you are not writing the next award-winning movie. We're not trying to create art, but we're simply acting as communicators, trying to communicate a call to action, get some sort of change to happen. And so that's part of the storytelling in terms of a component of stories. We'll take a few moments to walk you through a little bit more of this as I build out some of the details. Now, it looks really rudimentary because I am talking to you on the camera, but as we're working through some of this, what I'll do next is start framing it out. And so I have this thing kind of in a circle. I'm okay with that. Let's label this, because you need to be labeling things. Let's call it a brain dump. Interesting, awful word. And it is structure of a story there. So let's frame this thing in. And you can let your lines break a little bit, that's okay. So it's crossing there. And using a little bit of colors, I'm going to highlight some key components. This is empathy for the audience. And structure of a story. Let's go back. Highlight some of these components. I'm doing two folds. I'm sharing a little bit of my thoughts on storytelling, but also for you to learn some concepts as I'm doing some of this work here, is just how my thought process is working. I'm starting to frame things into the boxes, circles, blobs. There's a concept up here, so let me switch to a different color. I'm going to use orange. So here's a metaphor, black box, and I just want to frame this piece in some colors, create some interest. And while you're doing this as well, it's an opportunity, because I'm all about branding, take a moment to put your mark. So while I'm doing this, 1980 is a storytelling consultancy and agency. We want to work with clients to help you tell your story. And I'm a one-person show, so I like to be pretty scrappy. And I think scrappy is good because, for the most part, like I alluded to earlier, we're not doing art here, right? We're not trying to be Steven Spielberg. We're simply just getting it done, and I think that's important. I designed this logo to represent the intersection between the analog world and digital world. So 1980 is that is a generation between Gen Xers and millennials. You see, as I'm doing this, I'm both intentionally going fast, but also taking my time, because I have confidence that if I am relevant to the audience, that they will continue to watch. If this is a YouTube audience, you by now are gone. But if you're not gone, leave a comment, connect with me, let me know what you think, and welcome to 1980.